Okay.
I already got emails from him this morning.
All right. So he'll probably get on hopefully soon. Okay. Year of Learning, Dr. Paul Koningsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Reuven ben Labish, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nissen Hara Nissen ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mann, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Joel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva. Month of Learning by Charlie Gelfenstein, in memory of his mother, Dacia Gittelbas Meir Halevi, and his father, Meir ben Yaakov. Okay, today is also a day of learning plus Torah Fund by Hadassah and Marvin Bienenfeld, in memory of her mother, Chava Minna bat Yitzchak. And that is it for today. May the Shemas have an Aliyah, Krank, Rafia, Valti, Yashir, Shema, Tzliya, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael, a good gebenched Yar. So that is it. Okay. We should be on Hey today. Right?
Hey.
I'm going to, however, just go back a little bit. Just start us off again at the beginning of the statement on the bottom of Pei Daled Amud Beis, the last line, and then we'll go into today's material and deal with some of the issues connected. All right. Okay, so we saw that the Gemara was dealing with situations, okay, of a variety of let's call it adjoining domains, okay, and whether one actually would prohibit another. And the last example we saw was that the roof of one building was slightly lower than the Reshus Harabim that went along with it. Okay, and the question is, could, because people who passed in the Reshus Harabim put items, garments, parts of garments, hats, scarves, whatever, on top of the roof, okay, and they used it in that manner, is that enough to say that in that situation, those people who lived on the courtyard of that building, therefore had a problem, were prohibited from using the roof in that regard? Okay, and that as a result, we did not come to a total conclusion in that particular situation. So the Gemara now picks up, as I said, last line, Pei Daled Amud Beis, okay, with another statement, another ruling. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. This is Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. And this one we started a little bit yesterday. Bor shebein shtei chatzerot. We have a cistern that's in a narrow area between two walls, okay? And on either side of those walls are additional courtyards, right? Mufleget mikotel ze arba'ah. Okay, the cistern, okay, is 4 tfachim from the wall, okay? Umikotel ze arba'ah. And likewise on the other side, it's 4 tfachim separate from the wall, okay? And the buildings in those, let's say, adjoining courtyards, okay, there is some space, we assume, between the building and the wall, okay? So you certainly have at least a separate reshus on each of those areas, okay? Now, what happens? Says the text, he said, Zemotzi ziz kol shehu umemaleh. In the name of Shmuel, he's saying that this one can bring out a ledge, okay, to reduce that area, okay, and then put their buckets down to fill from the cistern. V'zemotzi ziz kol shehu umemaleh. And this on the other side, okay, also put out some sort of a ledge, right, reducing the area, and then can lower their buckets and draw water from the cistern. Okay. Now, Gemara picks up, V'Rav Yehuda, Didei Amar Afilu Kane. And Rav Yehuda himself, okay, said it did not have to be a large ledge, okay, but even some sort of much smaller item, say even a twig, a straw, okay, something like that, something of any size that would designate a reduction of the space, right? Amarle Abaye. And so here's where we pick up. Now, Abaye challenged and says, the Rav Yosef, Ha de Rav Yehuda, de Shmuel he. That statement that Rav Yehuda made, okay, it's not a challenge to what was said before, but rather it's a clarification, okay? Namely, it's Shmuel's statement, de Rav, in other words, Rav Yehuda, who had been a student of both Shmuel and Rav, must be saying it relying on the view of Shmuel and not relying on the view of Rav. Okay, why? Ha'amar, because here, okay, we say the following: Ein adam oser al chavero derech avir. Okay, we say that he must be basing it on Shmuel's view. Okay, that a person cannot prohibit someone else, okay, in terms of the airspace, let's call it, all right, that, okay, can't restrict them because of the airspace that goes over a certain amount of area. Ude Shmuel, okay, mehacha, and how do we know what Shmuel's position is on this? Ilema meha, if we learn it from this. In other words, let's cite a text that maybe that's the basis from which we derived Shmuel's view that the airspace cannot be prohibiting, okay? The Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, that Rav Nachman once said in the name of Shmuel, Gag hasamuch l'reshut harabim, a rooftop, okay, that is, okay, close, right, adjacent to a public domain, right? What happens? tzrich sulam kavu lahatiro, that we need a permanent ladder to allow those from the chatzer to climb up onto the roof and utilize it if they need be on Shabbat. Okay? So what happens? Dilma kidarav papa. So the Gemara says, wait a second. Maybe that's simply based on the interpretation we saw of Rav Papa, who said by Rav Papa's explanation, okay, that because the people put the items down on the roof, okay, it's not an issue of airspace whatsoever, and therefore it has nothing to do with airspace. That's why it's prohibited. So we can't use that part of the Mishnah as our basis to learn that airspace does not prohibit another party from utilizing the location. Elameha, but rather maybe we learn it from this example. Zemotzi ziz kol shehu umimale, v'zemotzi ziz kol shehu umimale. In other words, we learn it from our current Mishnah that says that by putting out a ledge of any amount on either side, okay, that reduces the 4 tfachim, and as a result, whatever, even if it's a small ledge, okay, that the remaining space is not enough to say it prohibits, okay, one chatzer towards the other chatzer. Okay? Why? He says, Tama da apik, okay? Namely, what he's telling us, that because it extends, okay, the ledge is extended, it comes out, right? Ha lo apik. But if it didn't extend, amrinan adam oser al chavero derech avir, then we would say that one person can prohibit his neighbor, another, okay, vis-a-vis airspace. Okay? So the Gemara then says, udarav mehacha. Okay, if that's the case, then on what basis does Rav say that airspace can prohibit? What's his basis for that? Ilema meha. If we're going to say from here, from this particular example of a text, namely, again, a Mishnah that we saw, Shtei gezus taraot, zo lamala mizo, 2 balconies, one, we said, above the other, but not immediately above. Okay, what happens? Asu mechitza la'elyona. Okay, and they made partitions for the upper balcony, right? V'lo asu mechitza la'tachtona, and they did not make partitions. Okay, we remember we talked about they made partitions around a hole in the balcony in order to lower a pail to get water to a cistern, right? Shtehen asurot ad she'arvu, that both, we said, are prohibiting one another until they make a joint eruv, okay? And so how would that teach us about airspace? Because we said that the lower residents of the lower balcony had to throw their pail up in the air over onto the upper balcony to get it through the partition in order to lower it then down to the axis of the water. Okay? Va'amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. And in that case, Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, Lo shanu ela bismucha, that they only taught this when the 2 balconies were near each other. Aval b'mufleget, but if they were separated, arba'ah, at least by 4 tfachim, elyona muteret v'tachtona asura, then the upper balcony is permitted to, okay, and the lower balcony is prohibited. Okay, so the Gemara is going to challenge that example. Dilma says, Shaniha. Maybe in this case of the two balconies, it's different. The Kevan de la Zeh Bizrika Vishilshu. Maybe we're going to say, no, in that case, we're going to give a different reason, that it has nothing to do, again, with Avir. But it says for the upper balcony, for the lower balcony, they have both to deal with throwing and lowering. Ulazeh, but in the regards to the upper balcony, b'shilshul lechude, there they only have to lower it. So maybe that case, the ease of use principle applied, and it has nothing to do with the whole question of whether avir is renders someone prohibited or not. Kalazeh bezrika. Dami. And we could say, maybe in that case, one is like throwing, and the other is like it has a doorway, a portal. Ela meha. But rather we have to therefore say that another source is going to be the basis by which we say that Rav holds that airspace is possible to be osir. Namely, the Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Abuha, Amar Rav, again in the name of Rav, Shnei Batim, V'shalosh Churvot Beinehem, that you have two houses, okay? And between the two houses are three sets of ruins, okay? Now, want to point out real quick as we continue with this, okay, that unfortunately Art Scroll only gives us one diagram, which we're going to look at momentarily, okay? Koren Steinsaltz gives us 3 or 4 different diagrams, okay? And I want to point out the issue here as we just before we hit the diagram. When we read this example, okay, right, that this was trying to suggest 2 houses with 3 ruins in between them. We might think, okay, think of it that's in a single row, 1 house, another, let's say 1 courtyard, another courtyard, and then the 3 ruins in between.
Right.
Okay? That's what might logically come to our minds first. Okay? But let's say that's not the case. Okay? Let's say it's possible that you could still have the 2 courtyards, okay? And you could still have 3 sets of ruins between them, but they're not all in 1 row, okay? Namely, Rashi is going to suggest you have a courtyard, let's say up in this corner, and a courtyard up in this corner, and then you have the 3 ruins in a triangular shape just below them. And other Meforshim come up with other kinds of examples, okay? That's what we need to understand as we now continue in the Gemara, okay? So this is what he said. Maybe Rav learns this whole question of airspace prohibiting from the following example, okay? Namely, these 2 courtyards with 3 sets of ruins, and going on, Zeh mishtamesh b'samuch shalo, okay? 1 courtyard can utilize the ruins closest to it, I'm going to say, al yedei zrika, by throwing, V'zeh mishtamesh b'samuch shelo. And the other courtyard can utilize the set of ruins closest to it, al yedei zrika, again by means of throwing. Okay? Now, certainly if we have the picture now in 85A3, opposite note 19, okay, that makes sense if they're lined up straight, okay, like that picture is showing, okay? But notice the note actually says that later on it's going to adopt a different configuration. Okay? Right. So what happens? V'ha'emtzai, and the middle one, the middle set of ruins, asur is forbidden. Okay? Right? So that any use of that middle set of ruins is prohibited on both on inhabitants of both sets of courtyards. Okay? However, now we're going to get a little more complicated. Right? On top of Pehe Amud Beis, Yativ Rav Brona. Rav Brona was sitting, V'ka'amar lahashma'ata, and he was learning, repeating this particular lesson. Amarli Rabbi Eliezer, Bar Be Rav, and Rabbi Eliezer, who was a student from Rav's academy, okay, overheard him repeating this lesson. Amar Rav Hachi, and asks, did Rav really say this? In other words, does Rav really hold that airspace is such that it can prohibit from two different courtyards? Amarle, and he said to him, yes. So Rabbi Eliezer then says, Achve li ushpize, show me where he's living. Okay? Achve le, he showed it to him. Ate lekame de Rav. He went and came before Rav. Amarle, and he said to Rav, Amar mar hachi, did the master really say this? Amarle, and he said to him, yes. Okay, I did say that. Now Rabbi Eliezer is going to challenge Rav. Amarle, and he said to him, Vahamarhu, but wasn't the master who said to Amar, Lazeh b'shilshul, ulazeh b'zrika, shnehem asurim? That in a case where we had, right back in those balconies, in one case where it was lowering, and the other they had to throw it, both of them are prohibited. They prohibit one another. Okay. Amarle, and so what happens now? Says to Rav Eliezer, Mi svarat, okay, are you really of svarat? Are you really of the opinion, the kaime kishura, that the three ruins are existing in a straight line? No, the kaime kechatsuva. No, that they exist like a tripod, okay, in the shape of a triangle, okay? And if you look at the example there, right in the text, right, that would be the case, that they exist in as a tripod between the two chatzerot, okay? Amar le Rav Papa le Rabba. And so what happens now? Okay, we see the following, okay? Lema Shmuel litle de Rav Dimi. If that's the case, okay, are we going to say then that it's only Rav that says that airspace can prohibit, and Shmuel doesn't say so? If that's the case, are we saying that Shmuel disagrees with the view of Rav Dimi? Techi'ata Rav Dimi, because when Rav Dimi came, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he cited in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Makom she'ein bo arba al arba, in a place, okay, where the area does not mention, the dimensions are not 4 by 4 tfachim, mutar levnei harishut harabim, v'levnei rishut hayachid, lekatef alav. It's permissible for those who are in the public domain, as well as those that are in the private domain, lekatef alav, to adjust their bundles, ubilvad shelo yachlifu, so long, however, okay, as that they don't exchange the loads. Okay. Now, what happened? Gemara complains and answers, Hatam rishuyot deoraita. Here, however, we're talking about domains as defined by the Torah. Hacha, right? In other words, in that case, okay, where Rabbi Yochanan gave his statement. Hacha, here in our case, rishuyot de Rabbanan. We're talking about domains defined by the rabbis. V'chachamim osu chizuk ledivreihem yoter mishel Torah. And the sages, however, made a clear strengthening of their views, okay, more than the Torah law. Now,
is that unusual?
Okay, so the implication being that because it was an issue of Eruvin, and that is an issue of the Rabbanan, they nevertheless tried to strengthen their view in that situation. Now, Amale Ravina Larava. Ravina now says, okay, makes a statement, still dealing with this issue of Rav and Shmuel as to who accepts airspace as prohibitive and who not. If that's the case, if we said that Shmuel does accept it as prohibitive, then the implication has to be that Rav is the one who says it's not prohibitive. So this is the issue. Right? Mi amar Rav hachi. Is Rav saying then that airspace is not prohibitive? Vaha itmar. Okay, but wasn't it said, okay, in regarding to this situation, Shtei batim mishnei tzidei reshut harabim. Okay, here we have two houses on opposite sides of a public thoroughfare, right? Rabba bar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, he says on the authority of Rav, Asur lizrok mizet lezet, that it's forbidden, right? Prohibited to throw from one house to the other across the Reshus Harabim, right? Ushmuel Amar mutar lizrok mizet lezet. And Shmuel says in that case, it's permitted to throw from one to another, okay? Which would seem to imply then that Rav holds, right, that Shmuel permits, right, that Shmuel, okay, does not say avir prohibits, and Rav says it does, okay? Amar le, lav mi okimna. So he says to him, again in response, right? The medale chad, okay? Didn't we establish in regards to that particular argument that one was higher than the other, umatate chad, and one was lower than the other? Zimnin the migad there, that perhaps there are times when the item that was thrown would roll back and therefore vinafal and fall down, va'ate le'etuye, and someone might then come along and pick it up and carry it, who's there in the Reshus Harabim. And that's the reason that they could have had this machloket, and given their answers, and not based on the issue of whether Avir does prohibit or doesn't prohibit. End result is we do not come to a clear conclusion, okay, at that point. Right? However, we do go on to a new Mishnah, right? And our new Mishnah, okay, is now, okay, going to clarify, okay, not the issue of Avir, okay, but the issue of still of location for the placing of the Eruv. Okay? So, Matnitin, says our Mishnah, Hanotain et Eruvo bebeit sha'ar, one who places the Eruv in a guardhouse. Achsadra, he places it in a portico. Umerpeset, on a porch. Eino Eruv, it is not considered a valid Eruv. V'hadar sham, eino oser alav, and one who may live in one of these locations, he is not prohibited. Okay. However, I'm going to add, okay, to the text, to the Mishnah, Beit Hateven, if there is a storehouse for straw, Ubeit Habakar, or a shed for cattle, Ubeit Ha'etzim, or a wood shed, Ubeit Ha'otzarot, or some sort of a shed that's used for storage shed. Harei Ze Eruv, placing it in one of those places is a valid Eruv. V'hadar sham, and if one lives in one of those places, oser, they are prohibited. Okay, in that case, unless they, right, they are prohibited from carrying then out into the courtyard. Okay, unless, of course, they are. And we're going to see more in the Gemara. Unless, of course, they either join in an Eruv with that person in those who live in the courtyard, or unless we're going to see another condition. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Im yesham tfisat yad shel bal habayit, eino oser. However, Rabbi Yehuda is adding a statement, okay, that he says that if the owner retains some rights, okay, to that location, okay, to that, to any one of those that we've mentioned, the woodshed, the storage house, the cattle shed, so on, right? Then if the person is going to be living in that location, okay, they're not considered what I'm going to call an independent resident, but they are considered an extension of the household of that owner. Okay? All right. Tfisat, im yeshem tfisat yad shel ba'al habayit eino oser. Then it doesn't prohibit that person. Now, Gemara. Amar Rav Yehuda bered the Rav Shmuel bar Shilat, says as follows: Kol makom she'amru hadar sham eino oser. Every place where it's said that if someone is living there, they're not prohibited. Hanotain et eruvo eino eruv. We say that one who places their eruv there, it's not a valid eruv. Chutz mi beit sha'ar diachi, with the exception of a gatehouse or a guardhouse where it's only inhabited by a single person. V'kol makom she'amru chachamim ein menechim bo eruv, and any place where the sages say that one is not to put there the eruv. Manichin bo shituf. It's permissible to put there a shituf mevuot. Chutz me avir mabui. Okay, with the exception of the air space of the alleyway. So my kamashmala. So what is it trying to teach us? Asks the Gemara here. Okay, what's its point here? Right? What is Rav Yehuda trying to tell us? Tanena, we learned already previously. Hanotain at eruvo bebeit shar, one who places his eruv in a guardhouse, achsadra, a portico, umirpeset, or a porch, eno eruv. It's not a valid eruv. Eruv hu de lo have. Rabbi Yehuda wants us to understand in terms of an eruv, it doesn't exist there. It's not valid. Ha shituf have. But if it's a shituf, it would be valid when placed in those locations. Beit shar diyachid, okay, if we're talking about, okay, this an individual's gatehouse, right? Va'aver de mabui, or we're talking about the airspace of the court, of the alleyway. Itztarichale de lotnan. It was necessary for him to refer to these because those laws weren't taught. Not only that, says the Gemara, Tanya nami hachi. And not only that, but we have a braita, okay, that now teaches as follows. Hanotenet eruvo bebeit sha'ar. One who places his eruv in a guardhouse, achsadra, a portico, umirpeset, a porch, ubechatzer, and in a courtyard, ubemabui, and in an alleyway, harei ze eruv. We say this braita says that is a valid eruv. Vahatnan. But haven't we just learned in another Mishnah, ein ze eruv, that that's not a valid eruv? Ema, I would say, change it and say harei ze shituf, that is a valid shituf mabuot. Okay? Well, Gemara questions, right? Shituf b'mabui lo minta. But if you simply make a shituf mabuot, okay, and just plop it down, so to speak, somewhere in the alleyway, it's not protected. It's not guarded, right? Ema b'chatzer sheb'mabui. But I would say, correct the braita and say it has to go into a courtyard that's off that alleyway. Now, right, let's go on and continue. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. So Rav Yehuda says now again in the name of Shmuel the following. And this is a brand new theme in a sense, okay? But it has, we're going to see that it is connected in a one manner, okay? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, B'nei Chavura Shahayu Mesubin. There are a group of people who are gathered together for a meal. Okay, it's Friday afternoon. V'kadesh alehen hayom. And the day has become sanctified. In other words, Shabbos has started, right? Pat sha'al hashulchan, the bread that's on the table, somchin alehen mishum eruv. They can rely on that as the, I'm going to say, source for their eruv. Va'amrela, mishum shituf. And there are others who say that they can rely on that as their source for shituf mavuot. Amar Rabba velo pligi. And Rabba says, really, there's no argument here. Kan b'misubin b'bayit. In one case, we're talking about a group that are seated eating together inside the house. Kan b'misubin b'chatzer. And here we're talking about a group seated and eating in the courtyard. Amar le Abai the Rabba. And so Abai then says to Rabba, Tanya de Messiah. In fact, there's a braita that supports you. Eruvei chatzerot b'chatzer. That eruv chatzerot are to be done in the courtyard. Ushitufei mebuot b'mabui. And shtufei mebuot, right, are to be done in the alleyway. V'havin and ba, and we discussed this and said, eruvei chatzerot b'chatzer. We raised the question, are eruvei chatzerot really done in the courtyard? V'hatnan, but weren't we taught in a Mishnah, hanotenet eruvo b'beit shar, achsadra umirpeset eno eruv? That one who puts their eruv in a guardhouse or a portico or a porch, that's not a valid eruv. Ema, I would say, phrase it this way, eruvei chatzerot bebayet shebachatzer, that the eruv chatzerot goes into a house in the courtyard. Shtufei mebuot bechatzer shebamabui, and the shtufei mebuot goes into a courtyard that's off the alleyway. Okay, now we go on, right? Rabbi Yehuda, excuse me, another part of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im yesham tfisat yad v'chulei. Rabbi Yehuda said, remember that if the owner had privileges, rights to that location. Hechidami tfisat yad, what do we mean then when we say he has the holding the privileges to that location? Kagon chatzero shabunayas. Like we said, the courtyard of Bunayas, Ben Bunai, of Bunayas. Bunayas was a wealthy landowner, owned homes in a number of courtyards. Okay, and we have now a short story. Ben Bunayas, Ata Lakame de Rebbe. There was once a situation where this Ben Bunayas, Bunayas, the son of Bunayas, came and he visited Rebbe. Amar laho, and he said to him, Panu makom laben meya mana. Set up move aside to make room for a man who is worth 100 mana, for this wealthy man. Ata inish achrina. Along came then another man. Okay, right? Somebody else came to visit Rebbe. Amar laho, and he said to them, okay, the following. Let's roll over a bit. Panu makom laben matayim mana. Okay, go and make room for this man who's worth 200 mana. Again, make room for this fancy, wealthy man. Amar lefanav Rebbe Yishmael beRebbe Yossi, and Rebbe Yishmael, the son of Rebbe Yossi, says to Rebbe, Rebbe, aviv shel zeh yesh lo 1,000 sfinot bayam uknegdam 1,000 ayarot b'yabasha. That he says that this individual, this man's father, okay, Bunayas, whose father's name also is Bunayas, he owns 100 ships that are out at sea, and he has 1,000 cities that are on land. In other words, vast holdings, vast riches. Amar lo, and Rebbe says to him, L'kashetagia eitzel aviv, when you reach your father, okay, and morlo al teshagruhu b'kelim halalu lefanai. Okay, in other words, don't have him send you before me dressed in worn out clothes. Okay, dress like a gentleman. If you're wealthy, dress that way and we'll accord you the proper respect. Okay, otherwise, how do we know, so to speak? Right, so we see the Gemara tells us, Rebbe mechabed ashirim, that Rebbe would show respect to wealthy people. Why? Because generally they use their money hopefully for good purposes, like helping the poor. Rabbi Akiva mechabed ashirim. Rabbi Akiva would honor, okay, wealthy people as well, okay, ideally for the same purpose. Kedadarish Rabba Bar Mari, as was expounded by Rabba Bar Mari, okay, in the following, from the following pasuk, right, that says, Yeshev alam lefnei Elohim chesed ve'emet min yinsaruhu, right? Namely, Emata yeshev olam lefnei Elohim. At what point do we say that the world, okay, is properly settled before Hashem? Bizman shechesed ve'emet man yitzaruhu. At a point where we say, where those who provide the kindness, okay, and truth, in other words, help deal with the poor, right? And that's where we're going to stop right there for today, okay? All right, and we'll pick up our discussion there, okay, tomorrow. All right, that way then we'll finish that Mishnah and then start a new one.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Hey, everybody, take care, stay well.